Good evening. Welcome again to the Canadian Orthodox Monastery of All Saints of North America. Again, I wanted to offer to send to anybody who wants it a copy of the meaning, Nature and Meaning of Sin, according to the Apostolic tradition. And for this evening, I wanted to offer two booklets. One is The Nature of Heaven and Hell, according to the Holy Fathers, and the other is The River of Fire, a great Orthodox Christian classic by the late Dr. Alexander Kolomeros. Now, we'll be happy to send one of these, all three of them, free to anyone who asks for them, to help clarify uh, items that are too large for us to cover in our 10-minute broadcast. We do want to talk about sin and the meaning of sin a little more because, again, Matt Spann has touched upon it from a sectarian point of view. And we would say that Protestants in general, like their Latin forebears, understand sin from a purely forensic point of view. That is, they understand it from a point of view of rationalism combined with the dialectic of the law court. They see everything in terms of human justice, human passions, and of human necessity. And all of these things they assign to God, and this creates a clear idolatry. So I have to say that the Southern Baptist Convention, from what Matt Spann has to say, is an idolatrous organization that has a clearly idolatrous view of God. We know God through Jesus Christ. We can know him in no other way than through Jesus Christ. Christ himself has made this clear. Even when we read the Old Testament, we learn very little about God, practically nothing. We learn a great deal about mankind and how he transfers his own passions onto God. The Old Testament is a constant struggle against this idolatry. And this is one of the great problems, that sectarians live in the Old Testament, not the New Testament. They have saddled themselves with the burden of law, whereupon we must say that they are no longer under grace, but under the law. For if they desire to see one point of the law valid, then they are subject to the whole of the law. And they, having made themselves subject to points of the law, make themselves subject to the whole of the law, and therefore they have abandoned grace and are no longer under grace, but under the law. And this is one of the great problems and great fallacies of sectarianism, of Protestantism. Now, we notice in reading their assessment of the Orthodox Christian understanding of sin vis-a-vis the sectarian understanding, that they completely misinterpret and misunderstand, and perhaps even evil-mindedly misrepresent the Orthodox Christian understanding of sin. We know very well what sin is. Hamartia, to miss the mark, to fall short of the goal. You can miss the mark and fall short of the goal, even while keeping the law completely. And you can separate yourself from God and lose your soul as quickly through your virtues as you can through your vices, because sin is missing the mark by whatever means you miss it. And I think the idolatry of Protestantism is a very good way to miss the mark or the goal, that is, to sin. We understand that sin has created a separation between God and man. Not a totally impenetrable separation, because we still hear the word of God. In the Old Testament, people still had some idea of God speaking to them. Through the prophets, we learn that essentially the Old Testament was not a legal agreement. This is the first great problem of sectarianism. They see the testaments as legal agreements, as something that was concocted through the dialectic of the law court. They see the relationship with God as being the same as the relationship with the emperor of Rome, and that relationship is formed by a bridge of Roman civil law, which they have transposed into some kind of divine obligations which God has, and deprive God of his freedom by saying that God needs to punish sin, the necessity of God's punishing sin, as if God could be subject to necessity and to need, because he himself is subject to some immutable laws of the universe over which he has neither power nor authority, but to which he must submit by punishing sin. Now, the idea that mankind simply sees sin and the fall of mankind as being knocked off the course, and that we simply need a course correction in order to continue to grow in our process of theosis. As a matter of fact, we understand that sin was a corruption of the human nature, and that corruption is our propensity, almost an addiction, to misuse our energies. We'll discuss the matter of energies as Apostle Paul uses the word a little later. But anyway, our habitual misuse of our energies is what constantly throws us off the path. Sin is not breaking a law. Sin is anything you do, even if you're obeying a law, which separates you from God. And our virtues can lead us into such pride and such arrogance, such self-reliance, where we no longer rely on the grace of God, that we can separate ourselves from God in that way also. Consequently, what we need is not simply a course correction, but an understanding that we by ourselves are not capable of properly using our energies in a saving way, in a way that reunites us with God and keeps from continually separating us from God. Now, the Apostle Paul tells us that we're held in bondage through the fear of death. Death is the wages of sin, and sin is a product of death. Because through death we miss the mark of everlasting life through union with God. And so that death as the wages of sin, because when we are separated from the source of life, then death is inevitable. When God said to Adam, "If you eat of the fruit, you shall surely die," he did not say, "If you eat of the fruit, I will execute you, or I will surely kill you." But if you separate yourself from me, the source of life, through your own choices, then death is the obvious result of being separated from the source of life.